Hey there, developers. Welcome back to Coding Saint. Today, we are diving into the fascinating world of Spring Boot and covering the magic behind handling of HTTP GET requests. Stick around as we explore @GETMapping and @requestMapping annotations, demystifying the HTTP GET verb, and learn how to harness the power of Spring Boot in efficient web development. Let's jump right in. Before we plunge into the Spring Boot specifics, let's talk about the backbone of web communication, the HTTP GET method. When a client sends a GET request to a server, it is essentially asking for specific information or a resource without making any modifications. It is like politely knocking on the server's door and asking for a piece of data. When we say it is asking for any specific information or a resource without making any modification, what do we mean by it? We mean that it will not change the state of any information at the database or on the server side in any manner. It means that the data was same even before the HTTP GET request was made, and it continues to be same even after the results are handed over to the client. Do note that this is just a specification that the data should not be modified at server side. Nothing stops or enforces us from doing so. It should not be done in favor of good practices and conventions that are being followed at software industry. There are some limitations for the HTTP GET request by design. GET by design lack data protection. The URL parameters sent along with the data are visible to everyone in the browser address bar. They are also stored unencrypted in browser history and cache. You are limited to a maximum of 2048 characters, minus the number of characters in the actual path. Before we go further and look at how Spring handles HTTP GET request, if you are liking this video, please hit subscribe so it motivates me to record more such informational videos. Let's code our first HTTP GET requests. In this example, let's see how the flow will be. User is making a request to the server. And from server, we will have to go to the database to get the data. So in data, there is a table which contains the user information. The user information could be like this. So where we have user's first name, last name, and the country saved. Now, in order to get all of it, we require an endpoint which could actually get us the data. So the endpoint for us could be HTTP localhost 8080, where our server is running, and the users, which is the last bit of this URL. If you see, it means we are trying to get or fetch multiple users. There are two different ways of actually coding it into Spring. One is GETMapping and another is requestMapping. Both are actually kind of same thing that you want to do, but request mapping is a little more generic. So if you see here, you can specify different methods, which could be get, put, post, which we will be discussing in further chapters. But for this one, we are using a request method.get. That means we are trying to get some data from the database or from the server. So if you want to write it into a smaller version, you can use GETMapping. It directly means the method is get, and you are actually trying to access the endpoint user. One more thing to notice is that this path variable, if you are using request mapping, or even if you are using get mapping, is actually accepting multiple values. So it is actually represented by curly braces. So if you want to map multiple URLs to same method, it can be done. You just have to specify multiple strings here. Let's go and code it into our application. Here, we'll go and create another controller. This is the same example from our last tutorial. So all we need to do is to create a new controller. So we'll create a controller and we'll call it user controller. All of such controller's job is to get the request from your URLs and try to serve it. In order to denote that, we need to annotate it with @REST controller. Now, this one is annotated with as a request controller, but we need to specify the method. So let's add a method to get the users. So we are trying to fetch the user record, which is this one. And all we need to do is to say, define the name of the method. Since we need to get it from a database and we already have a user repository, so we'll try to inject this user repository, or you can say it auto-wire it into user controller. The one thing which is missing here is the annotation GETMapping or the request mapping. So let's see the same thing with GETMapping. And all I'll do is to say users. Now we do have a method which will gather users and fetch everything from database. Okay. So let's try to rerun this project and see if it works. So now you can see we are able to fetch multiple users here, right? So this is how you code your first URL with the GET request. Now just think that you want to filter out all the users which belong to a particular country. In order to do that, you can have a URL which has a path variable added to it. The next URL that you are seeing on your screen has US and it is added as a country and then class US. This means there is in the path we are providing a parameter which is called path variable. If you see this path variable, you will always understand that you want all the users whose country is US. To find such things, you can actually use a path variable annotation into your application. Let's try to find this. So we'll use another method which will have users, and then we are telling that, okay, there is a country, and the country parameter will be provided after this. How will Spring know that there is a country provider? There is a variable which is passed after this. The time Spring will see these curly braces and there's a variable which is passed. It will try to find it that have we provided a value here. So here we can say that, okay, if you find anything in the URL which matches to this one, put it into another container. Here the container is a string, and it will hold the value which is coming here. So now, as you can see this, we have used the stream operations and then did a filter over all of the users that we have. There could have been a better approach. We would have used a query and would have created a method into user repository where using query, we could have filtered the values from the database itself. Now, we will try to add country and then we'll provide the parameter. So now you can see we are only getting those people who actually belong to US in the country. If I just say and change the country parameter to IN, I'll get only those which are actually belonging to IN. Now there could be another thing into it, right? Now what if I want to find all those users who belong to US, but their first name starts with John? Now we have 3 users here who are from US, but there are 2 whose name starts with John. We are providing a filter, the filter over this particular URL. So we are passing it by a question mark. And if there are more than one filter, you can pass it after adding an ampersand sign here. So since we have only one at this point, it is first name equal to John, but it is always after a question mark. So this way we are trying to query all the users from the country US whose name is John. To get that, Spring provides us with request param. So let's see this request param annotation. If you see what are the different things that this request param has inside it. So let's go and just see what this request param has. So you will see there is a value, there is a default, and the required default is true. So if you do not give, Spring will think that this is by default, this value is true, and you should always be providing it. So in case you want to keep it flexible, don't provide default value for it as true, which is actually required, right? So if I just write here required as false, if I provide it or if I don't provide it, it doesn't make a matter, and both can be handled by this method only. Otherwise, you'll have to create another method. So we are getting all the users, right? So if you see now, we are getting all the users here. If we try to now add by country, we'll get lesser result where we will have only those users who belongs to this particular country. And if I add another query, another filter here called first name equal to John. So it will try to find all the users who have named John. So if you see the third one has gone away from here. So if I just change this and say Ajay, so it will find all the users from the country US whose first name is Ajay.